The All-Star game is over. We're getting to the end of the All-Star break. The stretch run in fantasy basketball is here. So who are we adding to our teams? Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and it's Draymond. He's just talking. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Blue Sky at joshloyd.bsky.social, on Twitter at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms, and LockedOnDaily.com, that exists as well. I want you to go over there and find the newsletter for your favorite NBA team. Go do that. We are a couple of days away from the NBA restarting. There is one game on Wednesday. Be aware of that. A late game, Hornets-Lakers. It's a rescheduled game from the Fires earlier on, so just be aware there is one game on Wednesday, Hornets-Lakers, that's coming up, so just be prepared for that. Now, yesterday I did a show talking about streaming, which I think a lot of people appreciated. Some didn't. They're like, just tell us who the guys are to add, which again, I think defeats the purpose of a lot of this. The main takeaway that I want you to have out of that video is 5 games is better than 2. Like, it's as simple as that. And there's a lot of assumptions made in that video, which I talked about. And you're not always going to have a guy at the back end of your roster who plays the minimum amount of quality games that week. But if you're streaming correctly, and I detailed this all the way through, you can actually stream in easily with 4 ads, get 1 game on every quality game day the rest of the season. So you can actually use whatever roster spot it is, you can get 5 games out of it easy. And the point of me providing that analysis of like, hey, here's like averages of guys 100 in the ranking range of 100 or ranking range of 50 different players, is that if you miss out on the 1 guy that you want or the 2 guys that you want, there might be 6 or 7 others that you can get in there, and you're getting volume in. Right? It's volume in. And the gap was so wide that if the guy that you miss out on, you get somebody else, it's okay. Because if one of your players plays 1 game, your worst player plays 1 game or 2 games, and you get 5 games or 7 games in that spot, it's fine. Right? We hold on to these guys, and this is must add, and these 120th. No. The value of streaming is just so much bigger than holding on to one of those players at the back end of your roster. And while the numbers won't work out exactly like I put them there, that's true, because they are averages across a sample size of 30, 40 different players. But that's the idea, is the gaps are so large. You might get 50 points and 35 rebounds versus if you hold one player there, you get 17 and 6. Right? Doesn't matter if you miss out on your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth, ninth option. 5 to 1.5 is such a big difference. That's the point of that. And it's true, like if your opponent's streaming as well, you don't get the advantage. I get that. That is true. But if you stop streaming and your opponent still does, because you want to hold on to your back-end guy who's better, well, guess what? You lost that advantage and he now gains it. Or she now gains it. Your opponent gains that advantage. So if your opponent is streaming, that's what happens. That's what you should do. It's when you don't do it, or if your opponent doesn't do it, you've got a big leg up there. But sometimes you just need to have that advantage locked in so that you can keep yourself afloat. Okay? Again, I'm always open to discussions and critiques or ideas about this, but the what I said was, when I'm talking about adding a streamer, it's not adding one player to be your streamer. It's about adding someone so you get 5, 6, 7 games out of that roster spot, which is multiple players through the week. That is what streaming is. It's not that one player. It's not 2 players. It might be 4 different guys that you use in that one spot during the week, and there are a lot of different options for that. In saying all that, what is today's show? Well, we're talking about, I say winners, right? Oh, by the way, it's Drink Wine Day today, so maybe you feel like doing that. That's cool. I support you in your endeavors. What we're looking at here is guys, and we're going to do the Eastern Conference in this show, then a Western Conference show later. Go through each team and go, who's a player that's very, very lightly rostered, who might be someone that pops off? Doesn't mean you need to grab them now, because as we detailed in the show yesterday, and I'm putting these shows in a particular order for this reason, is that grabbing someone and waiting and holding and hoping they pop off is a bad strategy. Most of the time. Unless you think this guy's going to run top 30, top 50, top 70, it's a bad strategy. It's just being aware of names and being aware of options and being aware of guys who might be able to do something a little bit more for you or at least see their production rise. So when we talk about some of these guys and options on teams, it's just introducing, I guess, some different players into the player pool universe that you would choose from. Because a lot of these guys, you wouldn't have thought about them 3 weeks ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. But now I think they've got the ability to elevate into this discussion, this universe of top 150, top 120, top 100 type players. And they may not have done it before. Remember, one of your big enemies in the stretch run of fantasy basketball is holding too long. All right, let's talk about what I think is a good way to start on this. So let's take a look at the teams that I think are at risk of really having some interesting lineups, so to speak. Now, when people talk shutdowns, they overblow it a lot. I had people talking shutdowns at Christmas, right? Are this guy going to be out? They're shutting him down. He won't play again? No, this doesn't happen, right? It's not a thing that goes on. Now, what happens a lot with teams, if someone gets injured, yes, they will look there. If a team is pushing for the playoffs, a guy might be injured and needs surgery, and they'll do it after the season. If a team is going nowhere, they'll do the season now, which is obviously the smart thing to do. And that puts them out for the season. Brandon Miller and his wrist, for example. They could have pushed that through if they wanted to. If they were in a really strong spot, the Hornets, they could have pushed it through. And he would have played. It would have been painful, time off. But he would have had surgery after the season and missed the start of next season. That probably would have happened, okay? But that's not what happened. They're not going anywhere. And that'll happen. It'll have the same with like a Trae Mann, for example. Those are things that can happen or could happen. What also happens towards the end of the season is the final 2 weeks of the season can be really disastrous from teams sitting players down. It doesn't usually happen now. Like, it's not going to be we're coming out of the All-Star break and everyone's out. The teams that are bad, you'll get guys that are sitting more often than not. They probably won't play some back-to-backs. They'll have some weirdness. And the teams that have been terrible at this have been the Jazz and the Blazers. They have been the worst teams at this the last 2 years. Really the only teams that have gone extreme into it. And by extreme, I mean they start doing it before the 28th of March or whatever, which is usually when other teams start to do that sort of stuff. So when I'm talking about tanking risks, we'll go through each of the teams here, but that's what I'm going on about. So we'll just start with the Eastern Conference teams because we are doing Eastern Conference here. I will talk briefly. I'll give you the Western Conference teams as well, but we'll go into them in more detail in the next show. But I think these guys are at risk of sitting through, preserving health of players and maybe losing games. And on the East, there are more than the West. I'll say the Hawks, and I know the immediate pushback will be just they don't have their pick. I'm aware of this. It is an unprotected pick that goes to the Spurs. I know this. But let me put it this way. Them winning games doesn't benefit them at all. It doesn't really do anything. Them losing games, yeah, it makes the Spurs pick better, and you don't ideally want that, but I believe, and I think the Hawks think this, I believe that they were like, that is a sunk cost. We are not getting it back. We can't do anything to get it back. We can't do anything to protect ourselves and lose enough games to keep the pick. We can't do anything. So I think what they will do is they can work on preserving players' health who are banged up, trialing out other guys who might be in line for large jobs. Remember, this is a team that last year were in the play-in, and one of their best players at that time was Vit Krejci, and they didn't convert his contract so he could play in the play-in game. They just went, nah, we're good. We're not going to do that. We'll save it for off-season flexibility. This will help us win the game right now, but we're not doing it. That is what they did last season. So we're sort of, I think, seeing it now already with the Hawks. Like, Clint Capella just hasn't been playing. Will he come back and play? I don't know. Got no idea. Nance is gone. Johnson's gone. Buffkin's gone. Krejci's gone. They're all not coming back. They just waived Bones Highland, who they got into trade with some sort of weird, I don't know what that plan they were up to. I think it's going to be, won't be like, it's not like Trae's done or anything like that, but I think they're a team that you won't think that they're tanking because they've got their pick. Why would they? But that is not the entire purpose of not pushing at 100% all the way through. It'll be like Trae's been banged up all season. I will be very shocked if Trae Young is playing games in April. March, absolutely, yeah. I'd be very shocked if he's playing in April. The Nets is an obvious one, although they keep winning games because their coach is too good. They traded to get their pick back, unprotected, which they didn't have in a strong draft. And we're already seeing it with D'Angelo Russell's minutes pushing down a lot of these games. We're seeing it with the way that they're spreading rotations out. Buying out Ben Simmons. Yeah, weird stuff. But I don't know what they're going to do with Cam Johnson or D'Angelo Russell. But we know they're tanking. They're a big risk. And what they do with Cam Thomas, I've got no idea. I think they'll be very cautious about how much he plays, and D'Lo and Johnson play down the stretch here. The Hornets, okay, they're not going anywhere. They're terrible. There's the whole Mark Williams scenario to be sorted out. There is, again, people have these weird ideas also about Mark Williams, and I just wanted to spell this. People go, well, Mark Williams won't play because he's going to negotiate a buyout. That's not happening. 100% guarantee you that's not happening. Well, why doesn't he just demand a trade for how they've sorted this out? Also, demanding of trades happens for the top 0.05% of players. A guy on a rookie contract is not demanding a trade. The Hornets will go, nah. We know, we'll trade you when it's best for us. This is not a thing that happens. I actually believe that Williams is just going to play after the All-Star break. All the way through, probably not. The minutes will be a problem at times, and the back-to-back. So I don't think that he's not playing. But I don't know. That one it's a very confusing scenario. I also think there's zero chance that he plays for the Lakers, by the way. So the Hornets are one of those teams that I also think LaMelo is going to come back and play, but won't play through April. The Raptors, they have made it very clear. Some of it is coded, some of it is not. Jakob Poeltl told us, we're not trying to win games. He told us that in September. They came out and said about Brandon Ingram, hey, we'll reevaluate him every 2 weeks. But I'm probably not going to play this season. Yeah? You traded for this guy to be your $40 million a year player to add to your core that's probably going nowhere ever. But they are going to be tanking, and you will see players, Barnes, Quickly, Barrett, Poeltl. I'd say Poeltl's like a 2% chance risk of not playing again this season from now. I think he will, but I'm not going to rule that out. They're tanking, and the Wizards obviously as well. Not that they have a huge amount of options to sit down, but Smart, Middleton, Brogdon, they might play a couple of games post-break. I don't see that being an ongoing thing. And then the biggest question will be Jordan Poole. Does he play through it? And I think he sort of will. But it's the Brogdon, Smart, Middleton mess that could be a problem. The other two teams I've got on there are the Bulls and the Sixers. The Sixers have Embiid, George, and Maxey. They're very, very good players who haven't played well at all. They're in a situation where they have a protected pick to protect. It's got to be top 6, though, and for them to get down that low is going to be tough. The problem they have to watch, though, is that the teams behind them can eat. Like at the moment, Philadelphia is in the 6th spot. They're in the 6th seed spot at the moment, the Sixers, right? So you would think that would mean that they're likely to keep their pick. It actually doesn't mean that. They've only got a less than 45% chance to keep the pick if they finish in 6th. Their most likely outcome is 31% at pick 7, 22% at pick 8, and then 4% at pick 9. Their most likely is 7 or 8. So you need to keep a top 6 pick, you need to get down to 5, which is going to be really difficult for them to do because in 5 at the moment is the Raptors, who the Sixers are 3.5 games ahead of. The problem with the Sixers is that Brooklyn, Chicago, Portland, I'm not going to really include San Antonio there, but Brooklyn, Chicago, Portland are all within 2.5 games of them. And if the Sixers just win a couple of games, they move from 6th down to 8th. And then the odds of getting a top 6 pick become under 25%. So we'll see what they do. But there's a chance that they end up with pick 8 and lose it if they win more games than Brooklyn, Chicago, Portland down the stretch here. So that's why I'd be cautious with them. It is unlikely that they get to keep pick 6. That is unlikely. But it's still 45% chance if they stay in the 6th slot versus 20% chance if they go to the 8th slot. That's a big difference. And the Bulls, we know they shouldn't be trying to win games, but they are. They're not going to, but we know they're going to try. I do think that eventually something will click with these guys, and where are they? They're behind Miami by 3 games. And I think they're currently they're in the play-in spot, aren't they? Oh my God. Wow. That's insane. Yeah, they're in the 10 seed at the moment, 2 games ahead of the Sixers. So, now their lottery odds are obviously terrible, and they're in the 8th lottery slot, but in the play-in spot still. So they could theoretically make the play-in, lose, and still be sitting there in 8th in the lottery odds with a 25% chance of getting the number 1 pick. Or getting 25% chance of getting a top 4 pick. They could still do that. But I think that they will be very cautious about maybe keeping themselves in the play-in mix while also keeping themselves in the 7-8 lottery slot, keeping their odds of a top pick, which honestly, that's not a dreadful idea, but it's the Bulls, so I'll say it's dreadful anyway. On the Western Conference, which we'll talk about in the later show, I'll just throw the 3 names out there that I think are at risk of this tanking stuff. It's the Pelicans, it's the Jazz, and it's maybe the Blazers. They had a hot run, the Blazers, and then it's fallen off a little bit, so we just watched them. But the Pelicans and the Jazz, pretty clearly at this point, I would say. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax Taxes. It used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. And now Taxes is just matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find your every deduction possible. Find you every deduction possible. File every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All you do, so you get all the most money back guaranteed. That's all you need to do. Sit there and wait for it. I speaking correctly. There's no waiting. There's no wondering. There's no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Now, I think I will put some timestamps in this video just for this, because I know that was a long intro just to get some stuff off my chest about talking about the ideas of streaming and playoffs and the tanking ideas. Because we're going to talk about these players now, but in general, again, I think the principles actually end up being more important than the individual names. And I've said this so many times on this show. I don't think this show is about holding hands. And if you want to hold my hand, that's fine. Maybe we'll try it out. But it's not about me holding your hand and saying, pick this guy now, drop this guy now, and then take this guy that do this, and then trade this guy for this guy, and that is the win. It's not how any of this works. It's realistically just about having the ideas, the understandings, the principles of how the math, the game, the study of the stats work, how the fun of it, the players, or how it all works is understanding the basis behind it and making the correct moves at the right time for your particular situation and setting. So I've never sort of been one to be like, this is an ad and you drop this guy, this is the move that everybody makes right now. We're not in that situation like we're playing Fantasy Premier League or AFL Supercoach or whatever it is, where every player is in a universe where anyone can grab them and you see the price of them and you say, well, if I move this guy out and grab this guy, then yeah, and everyone can follow the move. Right? That's not the way that this sport works. So therefore, I'm not doing that. What I am doing is getting in now to talk about the divisions, the 3 divisions across the Eastern Conference, and some players just, I think, that are going to be important for us to keep an eye on. We'll start in the Southeast Division, and we'll start with the Atlanta Hawks, because I do think that George Niang is an interesting option at this point, right? Georgie came across in the DeAndre Hunter trade. He has played some pretty big minutes the last couple of games. Now, you can see on the screen there my projected ranks and fantasy points. They're not super high for him. I've got him projected to run at like 18 usage and play about 29 minutes as we move forward. He's 9% rostered on Yahoo. I went for pretty low numbers of roster percentage on these individual guys that I'm highlighting here. And his numbers down the bottom are his full season stats. But there's a chance that, like I said, if Trae Young doesn't play, if Karis LeVert gets hurt, which has happened plenty of times, Niang's usage might go to 25. He might go to 24. He might average 17 and 8, hit 3 threes a game, get 2.5 assists, and get you 0.8 steals and shoot 47 and 82 from the line. It's a pretty good player. That sort of a play almost moves from, hey, this is a nice streaming guy, into maybe this guy's like my 9th best player, right? It's just, and I chose him particularly to highlight here again because those roster percentages are very low. 9% Yahoo, 25% advanced. It's like just available everywhere. And again, the projections aren't loving him at the moment. But sometimes we look at projections and we can make the call on them. But things can go awry so quickly. And somebody can sit down 2 weeks before you expect. There's only 7 weeks left in the season. Right, that's all that's left, and that's going through to the end of April. That's all that's left. And someone can be down at any point. And if they go down 2 weeks earlier than you think, that's 30% extra playing time and usage for other guys. And things go way up. Like, if we're talking 20 weeks and then 2 weeks of change, it doesn't change the projection that much. With 7 weeks left, and if you want to lop off that final week, so I hit the mic, 6 weeks left. And if you don't include that Yahoo final week and the 5 weeks left, and if someone ends up missing an extra 2 of those you think they're going to play, like it's 40%. It's a big deal. So George Niang sits there on my list as a name to watch. Is he a grab? It's debatable, yeah. I think it's not a bad idea to consider adding Niang at this point. If I go to Charlotte, I'll put Nick Smith Jr. on the list. Charlotte still remains a very mysterious team. Does Josh Okogie return? How much does LaMelo Ball play? How does the Williams, Diabate, Nurkic group run? Does Miles Bridges play it out? Miles Bridges shooting 28% from the field, by the way. If you want to see something comical, also, Tidjane Salahin. He's a 6'11" power forward. Have a look at his 2-point percentage this season. Just go and do it. Just have a quick look. Just check out what his 2-point percentage is for this season, Tidjane Salahin. And you'll go, what is happening? The 6th pick in the draft is shooting 36% on twos. Smith is still available in a lot of spots. And I think there's a decent chunk of value in him. He's going to be up and down. And he's one of those guys that's got enough value at the moment to consider, to use, to maybe look at. But it's all about other guys disappearing and him going up. Like, if Ball does get hurt and doesn't play, and if Bridges is done, and if Okogie never returns, then Smith's going to have plenty of opportunities to put up like Keon Johnson type lines. Big volume, big percentages. Sorry, big volume, low percentages, but volume enough. For the Raptors, not the Raptors, sorry. The Heat. I forgot that he plays for the Heat now. It was tough to find that guy because the Heat are in that mix. They're the 9 seed at the moment. And I don't think they're at risk of tanking, but what has changed for them is the trade. Obviously, Jim is out. And they're going to start Davion Mitchell the rest of the way. It appears, for the foreseeable future. And while we don't love that, it's not great, but he's available in a lot of spots. And for some of you, there'll be some value in Davion Mitchell. Just at least put him into the streaming universe. He was out of the rotation in Toronto. Jamal Shed had taken his role. And now he's going to be a 35-minute-a-night player in Miami. So he's off the radar for a lot of you guys. Just put him back on the radar. Just put him into the mix. Just put him into the streaming zone. What if he gets 6 assists, 2 steals, but 5 points on 25%? Like, that is useful for some of you. And when you play 33 minutes a night, which he may not, but he may, you can run into a hot week, a hot 2 weeks, where things go right and you average 12, 4, and 7 with 2 steals. That can happen. He's bad, don't get me wrong, but he is going to play minutes, it appears. For Orlando, it's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Now, they are locked into where they are basically in the standings. Well, not locked in, but they're not tanking the Magic. They're sitting in the 7th spot. They'd love to keep winning to get ahead of the Pistons, but they're 2.5 games behind. It appears they'll be in that play-in mix, which will be the Hawks, the Magic, the Heat, and the Bulls. 3 teams from this division, by the way. That's how it looks at the moment. There's still a lot of stuff to play out, but it's going to be tough for them to elevate from here. But the guy that's just... I've talked about KCP a lot, and he's not a must-roster player at all. Like, not remotely close. And his guys have been rostering him a lot this season. Thankfully, all that number has dropped down, which makes sense. But we are, again, in the period where sample size is squished. We're all squished down here. And it is entirely possible that there is a hot streak that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope goes on that makes him really, really good. Because his role is fine. He's just playing terribly. And he's not a guy you want to just rely upon. But for me to say that I don't believe Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's a 12-team league guy, that's true. I don't believe he's someone where you go, man, got to draft him. Man, got to pick him up. Man, why is he on waivers? Because I look at that and go, what's the purpose? But he's one of those players that if they have a 3-game and 4-night stretch, then yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that volume accumulation. And he's fallen down enough to he's been hated on enough by certain internet individuals that I think that it's into a spot now where, yeah, he is available. Maybe we try that out. And the last name on that list is Corey Kispert. And the reason I put Corey Kispert on this list is that his roster percentage is so low. So I just want to, again, bring his name to your attention because I don't know what they're going to do. Now, Kispert's not a player that I like. He's an older player who seems to be, lionized by people for some reason. I've got no idea why. He's not very good at a lot of different things. But if certain things happen, Jordan Poole doesn't play, Kispert will take shots, and he will have, like KCP, he's probably got higher upside than KCP. He will have a run of playing really well. Now, he doesn't do it consistently enough. He doesn't do enough different things, but he's there. Got a bunch of other names just to make sure that they're like, or options others to consider. Karis LeVert probably just needs to be rostered. Mohamed Gay, his last game was not very good, but if they decide to lean into giving him 25 minutes, then we do roster him. Moussa Diabate, we just don't know the center situation. I think Diabate is someone I would hold for now. I wouldn't be doing it with the use of Nurkic at this point because they're not going to play all three of those guys big enough minutes, but we keep an eye on it. There's KJ Simpson, who, by the way, he has got 15 games left on his two-way contract. Be aware of that. And they have a full roster at the moment. Alfred Payton for them, his contract has expired. His 10-day has expired, I believe, and I don't know if they'll re-sign him. That was a hardship exception, and maybe we'll see if they bring him back or what they do with that spot. But KJ's only got 15 games left at the moment. They would need to create a roster space somewhere to convert him. But it is possible that KJ doesn't play for the next 3 weeks. LaMelo Ball sits the final 2 weeks, and KJ plays 32 minutes a night starting down the stretch. So just be aware of that. I put Tishan Salan next. I think they're going to give him minutes, and like if more than one in three of his shots go in, then maybe he's good. The two Washington guys, Bub Carrington and Keyshawn George, they're doing enough to be useful, but I don't think they're doing enough to be considered non-streamable when you head the playoffs. They've been good enough, but hasn't been the big usage bump that I think many were thinking. I'll put Tristan Vukcevic, AJ Johnson, and Passion Pop Justin Champagne on that list as well. I think that those three guys also will have little bits and pieces of moments in Washington that it will just depend. Like, do they sit Rashawn Holmes and Vukcevic starts? Do they try him and Sarr together? How much run do they give AJ Johnson? Like, it'll be something that's probably 3-4 weeks away, but they're just a bunch of names that I think are going to be at least worth your consideration. Today's episode is also brought to you by an old friend. It's Hungry Root. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, well, we all have problems, don't we? We can lack motivation or time. With work and family and friends and whatever it is, it can be hard to eat healthy. Well, with Hungry Root, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Hungry Root, it's a game changer. It's the easiest way for you to eat healthy without the stress of doing it. It's like a personal shopper and a nutritionist all wrapped into one. And the best part, the meals that Hungry Root recommends with the fresh groceries they send, well, it can be all ready in 15 minutes or less. They get the groceries, they shop, they bring it to you. You can select specific tastes and health goals like anti-inflammatory or high protein or gluten-free. It is all there. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as you possibly could. And for a limited time, get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. That is hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA. The code is LockedOnNBA to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice. hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA. Don't miss out. I think the Southeast Division is probably the most interesting division. That's although the Atlantic's got some stuff going on, probably the most interesting division in terms of like we've got all these weird Atlanta, Charlotte, and Washington who could all be chucking out the most random stuff of all time down the stretch here for us to pay attention to. So let's head across to the Atlantic Division now and have a look at the way that we think that this stuff could play out. The interesting guy in Boston is probably Luke Cornett. He'd been outplaying Al Horford for a period of time. I could throw Sam Hauser on there as well. Now, the Celtics aren't in the same position they were last season, where from here on out, last season, what they did is basically Brown or Tatum or White or Holiday or Porzingis, who's out actually anyway at this point, they just would sit every second game. Because we're so far ahead, we're like 14 games up, we're just going to preserve these guys. Keep their minutes down, but they'd sit at least one game per week. They're not in that exact same spot, but I think they're very confident enough in their team that they'll still be sitting some players at some point, especially Horford and Porzingis. So Cornett is probably the guy that we can play a cursory glance to. He seems to have moved ahead of Nemesh Keita, the Pastel de Nata, and ahead of the cashier, Xavier T. Illman. He's ahead of those guys, and he seems to have firmly established himself there. If you are in a deep leagues, the other guy that's sort of pushed into a large role, a little under the radar, first-round pick Baylor Shireman. I don't think we're rostering him anywhere, but he's pushed up a little bit. The one that I do want to talk about here in this section is the big fella, Day'Ron Sharpe. Now, Sharpe is a very, very strong permanent player for fantasy. He's currently 5% rostered in Yahoo. He's 14% on Basketball Monster. I'm projecting him at about 26 fantasy points, so around that 120-ish mark. He's averaging 8 and 6 so far this season with solid enough field goals, which can go higher. His block rate is okay, but that can also rise. And he hits his free throws not bad. The problem is that Nick Claxton is in front of him, and what happens when Noah Clowney plays? Does Clowney play center at all? Can Sharpe and Clowney play together? Yes, they can. But it's going to be interesting because the Nets have been a little bit tough to figure out. They've been pulling everyone's minutes back. In the last game before the break, they just said D'Lo, Cam, Claxton play 33. I don't think that'll hold all the way through. And I do think you'll get something happening. It won't be immediately. And again, stashing is not a great idea because it leaves you vulnerable and one of your streaming slots is disappeared through a guy who might not be useful. But I will say this. If Sharpe was to become the starter and Claxton was out and Sharpe played 30 minutes a night, he would be too good to drop. He would be a top 50 guy and you don't drop those players to stream. Whether you're in a position where you can hold and wait and see, but I don't mind that. Like between him and like a George Niang probably does more now, but like Sharpe does way more later on if it happens. But it's still a low chance of it going on. But he's an interesting stash who's available in a lot of spots. Just be aware that stash ability ends when you get into do or die discussions. So you have to make that assessment yourself for where you are in your league. I didn't include. I'm not going to be disingenuous here and tell you, oh yeah, but if you maybe just consider stashing Precious Achua on the Knicks, or we take a look at what if it's Juice McBride? Just no. There's no. They're not gonna sit guys. They're not going to reduce minutes. They're not going to do anything. The Knicks. It's going to be the same thing that it's been all season: boringness and stock standard static rotations, which is great from a real life perspective. Of course, we'll see if there's any way for them to ramp up in the playoffs. Probably not. But in terms of for our purposes, we get nothing out of it. So I'm not going to tell you there's anyone there. Philadelphia becomes intriguing though, doesn't it? Because, like I said, they're currently got the 6th worst record. They've got the tiebreaker over the Nets at 6. And they just brought in Jared Butler, who has immediately sort of grabbed that backup point guard role. Kyle Lowry was the other guy there. They moved on from Reggie Jackson to get Butler. Jeff Doughton's the other name there. Butler is he's just a name here that if they do decide, hey, Paul George's thumb, Embiid's knee, Maxi's hamstring/knee, which he did sit out with the knee before the All-Star break. I don't think it's a problem, by the way. But if they do decide this last 2 weeks of the season, this man will be an unbelievable option, Jared Butler. I will also mention this back to the Nets. Speaking of two-way contracts, Tyrese Martin, who's been playing like 21, 22 minutes a night for the Nets, he's out of two-way days. They're done. He can't play anymore unless he gets a new contract. So just be aware of that. He's done, Tyrese Martin, until he gets a new contract. The last name on my list is in Toronto. It's John Mogbo, who is starting at center. We talked at length in November about Mogbo, about him being someone that you think at some point down the stretch here, he's going to have an opportunity to put up good numbers. He's currently doing it. They're not great, obviously, in their Barnes and Barrett and Quickly and that are still there, but Pirtle's out. And I'm very going to be shocked. Well, that's bad English. I'll be really shocked if Pirtle's playing games in April. Incredibly surprised. More of a chance of Pirtle not playing again this season than playing games in April, in my opinion. So Mogbo could just start rest of way. And if he just gets 5% more ball handling or 3 percentage points more usage, 3 more minutes, he'll be someone to care about. So it's not quite as high of upside as Day'Ron Sharpe, but it's in the mode where he's doing sort of enough right now, and maybe it holds. He's unlikely to be a Sharpe guy that if these guys did sit down, that Mogbo would be undroppable for streaming, whereas Sharpe would be if he got that role. But he's a name to look at. Some other names that are just worth talking about from this division: Sam Hauser in Boston, and Brooklyn's got a million of them. Noah Clowney, I still believe he's going to have some value. Now, again, he's not going to be good enough to be not droppable for streaming, but we just watch what happens when he returns. Zaire Williams, Tosan Evbwamwa. Now, he's got the two-way game restriction as well. He's not at Tyrese Martin's level. In fact, I probably should just take a look to see where he's at, because we've got all this over at Basketball Monster now. We have a accurate two-way tracker, which I don't think anyone else does, honestly. Like, do you know anyone who's got two-way gameplay tracker? Or maybe there is, I don't know. But currently, Tosan has got 9 games left. on his two-way contract. KJ Simpson, by the way, for the Hornets has 15 left. So just, be aware of that with Tosan. Keon Johnson probably just needs to be on rosters at this point. For Philadelphia, I'll put Quentin Grimes there just because I look at his roster number, they're not high enough. He is just a guy to have for now. He's just a must-roster player now. Whether he becomes droppable later on, we decide that when we get there, but he's for now. Justin Edwards, again, that would be determining if George is out. Edwards has been playing pretty well, but Grimes is ahead of him at the moment. And then we go into Toronto, where the prestige penis, grade A Dick. Now, you know that I have not been the biggest fan of Dick throughout this season, but I do think that if you get like two of the main guys out, and he's there with Barnes, or he's there with Quickly, or with Barrett only, then second option Dick is better than the Dick we've been getting recently anyway. So that enables, he needs minutes, he needs usage, he needs the balls in his hand to be able to put up the numbers that we want, and he hasn't been getting that. So for now, like, if they were healthy, he wouldn't be sniffing 16 team leagues. But if you want Dick, like, this could be an opportunity. The other one there is Gary Trent III, Jacoby Walter. And if you want to get really deep, Ulrich Shomshi. My big call on him, who I actually liked in this bad draft, is like, hey, let's take a flyer on this unbelievably raw player from Africa, from that basketball academy, for the BAL league, and see what can happen. He is still incredibly raw. He played 12 minutes the other night. And my call at the start of the season was there is going to be a game in April that he starts. We'll see whether that comes true. That's one of my big things. It's not big. It's so small. But I said that. The other one I said was I don't think Larry Markkanen is going to play 4 games in a calendar week the rest of the season. I said about 3 weeks ago. We're on track. It's getting dicey because he played it back-to-back, but we'll see. We'll see whether Shomshi starts. But just a name to go. Who's this guy? A shot-blocking, maybe 3-point shooting, rebounding big man who, if they are all falling apart, remember, they played Garrett Temple 25 minutes a night at the end of last season. Anything can happen with the way that they could potentially run things. Let's go to the Central Division. The least exciting of the 3 divisions. That's why I left it until last. In fact, 3 of the teams I don't even think we need to worry about. Indiana, what are we worrying about? They're sort of in the mix of things. They're not shutting guys down. They're not easing off the pedal. There's no big change. They're just who they are. There's nothing interesting. Milwaukee, same. They're just in the middle. They're sitting in that 1 through 6 grouping. They're in the playoffs and they want to keep staying in the playoffs and not getting to the play-in. Nothing interesting. There's no interest at all in the sort of stuff that they're producing. And the other one is Detroit, who is also in that group. And they're going to want to keep winning. And they're going to want to keep producing so they don't fall into the play-in because they're 6th at the moment. I mean, nothing has really changed massively on that team. And no one really... Asar Thompson's rostered in a lot of spots, but doesn't really stand out as a name here. So the 2 we look at is Chicago. And I look at Jalen Smith still. He's doing sort of enough to be a soft hold. But you don't have to do that. It's probably more 14 teams than anything. If Nikola Vucevic does sit down games down the stretch, and I think there's a risk for him. I think there's a risk for Kobe White, who's had been banged up a little bit with some ankle stuff. I think there's obviously going to be risks with Lonzo Ball as well, especially now that they've signed him to the contract. They'll be like, okay, Lonzo, maybe pull back a little bit. So I do think that Vuce has that risk a little bit. Not that he's necessarily contributing to a huge amount of wins or anything, but it might be just like, hey, no need, Vuce. Like, we'll move you in the offseason, whatever we're doing. But it's the Bulls. Who knows? And the other name that I've got on this list from this division is the Winter Soldier Max Strus in Cleveland. Because Strus has just returned from that ankle injury. He started last game over DeAndre Hunter. He's only 10% rostered. His usage is low. I'm not projecting him particularly highly at the moment. 23 fantasy points, about 160th for category leagues. It's not that good, right? But the Cavs they're not quite in the position of the Celtics of last season, but they're 5.5 games clear at the moment. They're 44-10. The Celtics are 39-16. The Knicks are 36. They're 8 games ahead of third spot. They are miles ahead. And Kenny Atkinson's thing all the way through, before the season started, was like, I am going to protect my players. I'm going to keep their minutes down. And they are going to be systematically and planning out the way that they can keep their guys' minutes and games played down here to be healthy for the playoffs. And that will mean there'll be little, and Strus will be sort of included in that, but there'll be little spike games that appear for Maximilian during that time. There will just be little spike games that appear for him, where there are opportunities for him to have bigger roles, bigger usage. Now, the Hunter thing, Okoro, Wade, all that stuff, Jerome, all these guys still exist here. But it's not, he's just more of a name that's available who I don't love as a must grab. I don't think he's a must grab at all. What I do think he is a name just to chuck into your list, just to have in that mix of like, hey, just watch. What if we get to a stage where someone does get hurt or isn't playing? Maybe Strus can have a 1 week run or a 2 week run. But there's a little bit of a bump coming. Let me just take a look at a couple of other names that are worth talking about from this division. We got Lonzo Ball. I put Matas Buzelis in there. It hasn't been very good the last couple of games. I'd like to hold and see what happens in this next sort of half week to 2 weeks. I've got Ayo Dosunmu, who again just probably should be on a roster, but I'm not sure. He might become, but I'm not sure he's going to be good enough to be a must hold. Milk Jerome, who's at least in that streaming mix. I don't think he's a guy to must roster. Malik Beasley similarly. Again, if you believe that holding on to Malik Beasley through all of this end of season stuff is a solution to win a league, I don't think it is. He's been solid enough all season, but he is not good enough to be the guy that you hold on to where you could sacrifice him in certain weeks to get 4 extra games in. He's not good enough for that. Andrew Nembhard, similarly, fine to have, fine to not. And Gaz Trent has always got that pop-off ability, but trying to predict when Gaz is going to do that is usually not a very easy task, like at all. And that was a Eastern Conference post-All-Star maybe winners for the stretch. Just a few names to bring up that I think have an opportunity to at least spark some joy and imagination for us as fantasy basketball players. And some of you may not have been thinking about some of these names. Some of you would have been. Some of you will be sitting there, double honouring this stuff. And of course, they're rostered in my league, Josh. They have been for weeks. Max Strus been rostered actually since October the 20th. He wouldn't last a day in my league. So, yeah. That's great. Hit the thumb, subscribe, leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.